Welcome, guys, to How the Frack We Got Here, a show that takes the news and events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, and on this show, we simply are all about the facts. There are plenty of news stations out there that simply want to do anything short but inform you. Here at How the Frack We Got Here, that's all we believe in. We go up to the left, we go up to the right, we go up to the middle of independence. We go up to all sides because there's more than one side of a story to everything. And you need to know it all in order to actually formulate your own opinion. And that's what we try to do here at How the Frack We Got Here. Thanks for listening, and hold on. It's going to be fun.
All right, guys. Today's date, March the 20th, 2024, and this is How the Frack We Got Here. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan on the Frack We Got Here. We do take the events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. Before we get started, guys, to let you know that we do try to be a news podcast, which means that we do try to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Only getting our sources from reputable information that has award-winning journalism. We do not do sensational news like Fox News, Newsmax, The Blaze, or whatever extreme left or right that some people go to. We simply give you the facts. Just the facts, nothing but the facts. At the same time, guys, we do try to watch our language, but sometimes words do fly. At the same time, guys, there are things that might be shown that might be too intense for younger viewers. So your discretion is advised. Aside from that, welcome. So, how do we really start this here, guys? Usually I start something upbeat, something, makes you understand or makes you do something happy. But, well, there's no real way to start this except the fact that Texas has moved forward in the Hold My Beer championships between the lower states. What you mean by that is, well, if you're an immigrant in Texas, you should be concerned, illegal or not.
Tonight with this new ruling from the Supreme Court allowing Texas to take action on its own when it comes to illegal immigration, allowing Texas to arrest people suspected of crossing into the U.S. illegally, and in some cases, allowing Texas to deport them. It comes after a major clash between the Biden administration and Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Late today, the Supreme Court had a 6-3 ruling, the 6 conservative-leaning justices ruling in favor of the Texas governor. The court lifting the stay, the hold on that state's controversial new immigration law for now. The Biden administration calling the law unconstitutional and a clear violation of federal authority. So what does this mean? The immediate change on the ground in Texas. ABC's Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years, leading us off from the court tonight.
Tonight, authorities in Texas can now, on their own, arrest people who they suspect are migrants here illegally, regardless of federal law, and even send them to Mexico. The Supreme Court's conservative majority granting Texas that green light for now to enforce its controversial immigration law. In a 6-3 order, the High Court rejected a request by the Biden administration to intervene and place the law, SB 4 as it's called, on hold while it is challenged in the lower courts. The Biden administration argues the Texas law is an infringement on the federal government's exclusive authority over immigration law, a power grounded in the Constitution and affirmed by the Supreme Court. Tonight, Texas Governor Greg Abbott called the court's order a, quote, clearly positive development. But in a concurring opinion, conservative justices Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh made clear that this is not the last word. They want the lower appeals court to render its judgment first on SB 4, and then the Supreme Court can review that. But in a scathing dissent joined by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the court's order invites further chaos and crisis in immigration enforcement. Sotomayor adding, this law will disrupt sensitive foreign relations, frustrate the protection of individuals fleeing persecution, and deter non-citizens from reporting abuse or trafficking. The ruling comes as federal migrant apprehensions across the southwest border reached an average of 4,200 daily, a sharp decline from the peak of nearly 11,000 in a single day back in December. So now this case goes back to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit with a nudge from some of the justices to move quickly. And that could mean this Texas law could be back before the Supreme Court soon, perhaps within days. Still, the White House tonight is saying that the court's order today will, quote, sow chaos and confusion at the border. David?
So again, you know what Texas is doing right now? And I hate to be this guy, but Texas is pretty much, Texas law enforcement is pretty much being the Gestapo right now. Papers, please. Papers, please. That's what they're doing. And because the law known as SB 4 is a scary thing, because basically what law enforcement is allowed to do, that if they suspect said person is illegal immigrant, they can stop and frisk, arrest, and deport them. And here's the problem with this. Local law enforcement in Texas should not have this ability. But what's scary about this is that, of course, in a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, and I say conservative-leaning because, again, we have been saying this on this podcast, what happens about the dangers of a conservative-leaning Supreme Court. What I mean by that is, guys, is that means that for a lot of things that are submitted from a conservative state or from the GOP may or may not have favoritism. But let's kind of be honest. Their track record right now for a conservative Supreme Court seems to do a lot of favoritism. Striking down Roe versus Wade, striking down Roe versus Wade, striking down a part of the affirmative action, which killed diversity and inclusion, DEI programs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because some states are moving to actually remove those programs and positions. But at the same time, now the Supreme Court, again, all conservatives with the liberals voting against it. But again, when you have 3 liberals and 6 conservatives on a Supreme Court, what do you expect? Granted Texas the ability to basically go along with their law, but sat there and said, well, I mean, you guys can appeal and it can go through lower courts and then, make its way back up to us and then we'll look at it again. But why? Because at this point, you have said loud and clear with Governor Abbott, who is acting more like DeSantis every chance he gets in Texas, that he wants to keep government officials from tearing down the razor wire that he put up, that he wants to make sure that women can't have abortions in his state. He wants to also make sure that guns get more protection than children. Why are we not surprised that he wants to weaponize his local law enforcement to sit there and detain illegal immigrants? Because, for lack of better words, some GOP people can't stop saying Laken Riley's name. We must make sure another Laken Riley doesn't happen. And I'm going to be honest here, guys, because I'm just going to just go out and say it. Whenever a white person is killed by a illegal immigrant, conservative news likes to use that as a stoking fire to sit there and say what they've been saying the entire time, that this needs to happen. The immigration system is broken. According to Donald Trump, they're sending their worst. They're sending us their prisoners. And a woman getting killed by an immigrant just stokes that fire. So again, I am not surprised that this was allowed to pass because we have a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, which I look at Biden the whole entire time. If for some odd reason Trump was able to squeeze through 3 more conservative judges, he was able to squeeze through with no issue because he wanted to pack the Supreme Court. And keep in mind, the Supreme Court has multiple seats. It's not just those that we have there. Biden and the Democrats could have turned around and said, through reconciliation, we want to go ahead and nominate, besides Kajani Brown Jackson, which they only put in one to the previous mentions 3. We could have put in 3 more and it could have been fine. But, the fears of packing the Supreme Court, we don't want the Supreme Court to be favorited. We don't want the Supreme Court to go any other way. But as it stands, it leans to the right. Why are we surprised? At the same time, guys, why are we surprised that, again, when it comes to Trump, first and foremost, let's get to the part to where he has the thing that he said lately and the lack of, I won't say response. Let's just say it's not as loud as if someone else was spewing Jewish hate. But in this case, Trump decided, well, if you're any Jewish person, and he said this, any Jewish person that votes against Democrats hates their religion. Well, you can judge for yourself the feedback.
Former president said.
Why do the Democrats hate Bibi Netanyahu?
I actually think they hate Israel.
Yes.
I don't think they hate him. I think they hate Israel. And the Democrat Party hates Israel. Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion. They hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
All right, so the Biden campaign was pretty quick to respond to this. They said, quote, the only person who should be ashamed here is Donald Trump. Donald Trump openly demeans Jewish Americans and reportedly thinks Adolf Hitler did some good things. Our panel's back. Evan Osnos, can you, I mean, what Trump had to say here is very incendiary. Can you just dig into why a little bit? Because there are tropes at play here that are pretty ugly.
Yeah, it's very offensive, frankly, to American Jews. I think the idea, on the one hand, that people would hate the state of Israel because they're voicing their opposition to a policy is something that bothers people. Also, the assumption that Jewish identity means support necessarily for Israeli policy is also really bothers people. There's something else going on, too, which is that, Donald Trump is trying to distract attention from the fact that the Biden administration has moved on this issue over the course of the last few months. I mean, if you remember when this began in October, Joe Biden, of course, went and embraced Bibi Netanyahu. But when I saw him in January talking to the president about this question, he said something important. He said, look, the pressure on the Israeli leadership to move against Hamas with every ounce of capacity is real, he said, but it also doesn't mean that it should be continued or that it's right. He was drawing a real line about where he thinks this policy can go and where it shouldn't go. And that's what you're seeing playing out right now.
The Republican governor of South
And I just realized I was muted. My bad. My bad, guys. I just realized I was muted. So what I was saying was, it's amazing that Trump can sit there and say something so heinous, but where's the after effect? Where is the where is the the anti-Semitic? We can't be anti-Semitic. We should be protecting. We should be saying more about this. There should be more than just stop the Jewish hate and things of that nature, because he pretty much just sat there and insulted an entire group of people. But the noise response isn't what it used to be. And I'm going to be honest, is it because we're so used to what Trump says, that we're so used to things that he's saying crazy, that we're used to saying, we're from a guy we sat there and said, a guy who sits there and says, well, grab him by the hootie hoo. Or I moved on her like a bee in heat. Or, I can practically do whatever I want and people will still cheer for me. It is amazing that when you really think about it, that how scary those last two statements I made are true. And the fact that, yes, there probably will be an answer to it, but it's not as loud as if someone else said it. So have we really gotten so desensitized to Trump saying outlandish things? Because as I've said this before, it is amazing that, in Trump's case, Trump is every white man's fantasy, which means he can say at this point and do at this point anything he wants without consequence. Well, to a certain extent. But he has said things. He has pointed out individuals. I mean, even his own political rivals during his campaign for the nomination for the Republican presidential nominate for the Republican presidential race, he's insulted everybody, and yet no recourse. And so I have to ask this question, even when you're looking at the fact of where it is now that he insulted the Jewish people, why isn't the recourse not as loud as if someone else that wasn't Trump that said it? But enough of the bad news. Let's get to some good news that, the clock is ticking on Trump, and in a good way.
Or what comes next in this process? So now it is before the appeals court. There's been briefing on this. It's up to this New York State appeals court to decide whether to allow Trump to move forward with the appeal and stop the attorney general's office from seizing properties to give them this time to have the court case play out. If the court says that Trump does not get this stay, Trump's side is asking them to allow them to put their ruling on hold so they can appeal to the highest appeals court in New York State. Those will be decisions for the New York appeals court to decide. And of course, the New York Attorney General's office has opposed this. They want the appeals court to allow them to enforce the injunction now if Trump cannot post that bond. Well,
ooh. Oh, yes. Trump's having a problem with money. I know. Shocker. What I mean by that, guys, is this is going back from the case that New York AG Letitia James is waiting for, because Trump doesn't have a lot of time left. For all those that don't remember, Trump lost his case against the AG because he might have slightly lied about his real estate holdings and things of that nature, maybe cook the books a little bit, found guilty, and was handed a $400 million plus judgment. Now, 464 million, if you were to be honest about it. But here's the thing. Of course, Trump, in complete litigation detail, wants to turn around and appeal it. The judge says, cool. If you want to appeal it, you're going to have to put up a $464 million bond, the actual judgment summary of the case. Trump's having a problem because, well, his people can't find a way to find someone who will underwrite the bond. And for everybody else, I mean, for a guy who, again, says he has all this money, I have plenty of money, but I just choose not to do it. So it's like, so let me get this straight. So you have all this money, but can't make the bond. And for all those that are not paying attention, Trump is running on limited time. What I mean by that is within the next 14 days or less, if Trump himself within 14 days or less cannot make the bond for $464 million, well, let's just say Letitia James and company has sat there and said what we all hope she will say. We will start seizing his assets. What assets does Trump have, however? I mean, he has a penthouse. He has Trump Tower. He has Mar-a-Lago. He has other land and other areas he can get. But nothing is more satisfying than a con man watching everything that he has built, albeit through ill-gotten gains, be taken away from him. Only because he can't make payments. Oh, the dripping irony of it all. So we're actually on watch for that. We really are. We're trying to see whether or not Trump will make the bond. Again, $464 million. No bond person, no underwriter has touched it. I can only imagine that he's reaching out to, everybody. But, he can't reach out to Russia because that's fairly obvious. That well done one dry because he's a compromised president. So we will see within the next 14 days whether or not Trump can come up with it. If he can't come up with it, then hey, it goes to an appeals court. However, it doesn't look good. At the same time, you can only imagine the spectacle of watching Mar-a-Lago, Trump Tower, and all of his other holdings be repossessed by New York. I'm just saying it'd be primetime television. That's all I'm saying. But moving right along, guys, I wanted to cover this as well because we are seeing finally one of Trump's people go to court. And all I can sit there and say to Mr. Peter Navarro, who decided to hold a press conference before serving his term in prison, don't drop the soap.
One of Donald Trump's former aides, Peter Navarro, now in prison tonight, despite his appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. Here's Jonathan Karl.
Tonight, former White House advisor Peter Navarro became the first senior Trump administration official to go to prison.
You got to stop meeting like this.
Convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the January 6th committee.
This is the partisan weaponization of our judicial system.
He'll be spending up to 4 months in a low-security prison in Florida, where most of the inmates are elderly men convicted of white-collar crimes. He'll be required to do a job of some sort, likely low-level maintenance.
I think it's a shame. I think it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our nation what they did to him.
This comes as Trump is calling for the prosecution of his political enemies, including former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who led the January 6th committee, He says Cheney, quote, should go to jail.
Please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
And at Trump rallies, he stands to salute the national anthem sung by inmates in prison for what they did on January 6th. Trump calls those people who attacked the Capitol patriots, suggesting he'll pardon them on his first day in office. Over the past couple of years, many Republican leaders have sought to minimize or even forget about what happened on January 6th, but not Donald Trump. As he embraces those who attacked the Capitol, he is increasingly putting January 6th at the center of his 2024 campaign.
Because that's what a cult leader does. It's what a cult leader does. He's going to make sure that, hey, you're going to vote for me because I'm going to stand with these so-called patriots, or as I like to call them, terrorists. But yes, Peter Navarro going to prison for 4 months at low security, might as well be club fed. But again, it's interesting that we finally, you're seeing all these people that are part of the former Trump organization either going to jail, indicted, or being fined or turning state's evidence. But it's funny that he's going to turn around and say, well, this is a sham, this is a farce. And Miss Cheney herself, dripping with irony, is one of the reasons why he's going. While Trump is sitting there saying this is a witch hunt, the classics, this is a witch hunt. They're only coming after me because I'm winning. They're only coming after me because they know I can be president again if I want to. And yet he's embracing the terrorists on January 6th. Even more so, saluting to a sung chorus of the Star Spangled Banner by them. And it's amazing that people are like, well, he's embracing them. I said, yes, every cult leader embraces his flock. Every cult leader is sitting there saying, you know what? We can go with this. We can get behind this guy. And that's what they did. And as messed up as it is, this is the reason why I keep saying the entire time why you should be worried. Because as funny as it is, there are more people out there who are not in jail who swear up and down Trump should be president and will be voting. And unless you want to repeat of 2016 again, all I got to say is I hope you guys will not sit this one out. Because as you can see, Trump is steady more dodging lawsuits. He actually may or may not make his deadline to pay for the bond. His properties may be seized. But here's the crazy part. His daughter-in-law now runs the RNC. The RNC does have funds, which are basically using to pay for Donald Trump's legal funds. So as much as we want to see this person go away, there is a scary-ass chance that he still might make it. But also, before we move on, though, Trump again says something crazy, and yet it's downplayed.
Once again, playing cleanup. I know it may be hard to believe, but the presumptive Republican nominee is once again firing up his base and his critics after another rally full of rhetoric, this time warning that there will be a bloodbath if he's not elected. Also, again, referring to those charged in the deadly assault on the Capitol as hostages, while throwing in migrants as well, calling them animals, who in some cases he doesn't even consider people.
In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion, but I'm not allowed to say that because the radical left says that's a terrible thing to say. These are animals, okay? And we have to stop it. We can't have another Lakin. We have so many people. We have so many people being hurt so badly and being killed. They're sending their prisoners to see us. Don't be surprised when bad things happen, because bad things will happen. And we're going to get them out fast. We're going to have the largest deportation effort in history.
Let's bring in our Deputy Political Director, Avery Harper, for more. So Trump has used this kind of ugly language before, Avery, and we know immigration is a top issue among the GOP. Is that who this message is for?
Right. So we do know that former President Trump is repeatedly used anti-immigrant rhetoric. It is a recurring theme at many of his rallies. And yes, when we look at exit polls from the primaries that have already happened, oftentimes we see that Republicans rank immigration as the top issue of concern as they cast their ballots. But when we see a more broader group of Americans polled in our latest ABC News Ipsos poll, what we found is that Americans actually give former President Trump higher favorability numbers in comparison to Biden when it comes to who they believe would do a better job at handling the border situation.
And it's only March, Avery, as we were all saying around here. There's a lot more to go. While we have you.
So what's crazy is he talks about a bloodbath, but I'm like, you're trying to walk that back. He's talking about the tariffs, because where he was at was for auto workers, but he's turning around saying, well, I would put tariffs on every other non-American car, which means that he would probably go after Nissan. He'd probably go after Toyota, Alfa Romero, and these other foreign car companies, because, you know, he considers himself a tariff man. I cannot stress how much Trump knows about tariffs, which is very freaking little, because his tariffs plan that he tried to do last time almost screwed the economy over when he was president. That he put tariffs on incoming items, which jacked up prices, because let's be honest, the prices were passed on to the consumer. And so what is he saying now? Oh, well, I'm going to save the automotive workforce by pretty much putting tariffs on imported cars. No, that's not the problem. But at the same time, it sounds good because, again, Trump loves the poorly educated. And at the same time, if you understand how a tariff works, then in your mind, if someone that's in a suit and looks important says tariffs are good, 9 times out of 10, that person gets there and say, well, I guess it must be, because look who says it. Trump is a con man. And again, what all con men do, they gladly make them give you your money to them with a smile on your face. Because it's not theft if you're giving it away willingly. So again, with Trump now saying, you know, I'm only talking about the bloodbath that would be with the auto industry. Let's be honest, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Has Trump successfully, outside of reality television, actually went into an industry where he didn't destroy it or didn't claim bankruptcy? Because if you can point one out, I'd gladly love to know. Because he's good at fleecing, he's not good at keeping an industry alive. But I digress. But speaking of his cases, Fani Willis was allowed to remain on the case of the Georgia election interference case dealing with Donald Trump, but it does come with the price.
A high-profile shakeup in a high-stakes case against Donald Trump over election interference. Blaine Alexander is there, and Blaine, this is another case that has been slow to move forward.
Absolutely, Lester. These were bombshell allegations that delayed this case here in Georgia for more than 2 months. Now tonight, a judge has ruled that DA Fani Willis can remain on the case, but without her lead prosecutor. He was front and center when Fani Willis announced her criminal indictment of Donald Trump. But tonight, Nathan Wade, the man leading the prosecution against the former president for allegedly trying to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results, has resigned, the culmination of a months-long spectacle after one of Trump's co-defendants, Michael Roman, exposed a romantic relationship between Wade and Fulton County DA Fani Willis, who hired Wade on the case. Roman accused Willis of financially benefiting from her relationship with Wade after the two went on vacations together while working the case. In a ruling today, Judge Scott McAfee said while he did not find an actual conflict of interest in the case, he did find a significant appearance of impropriety that infects the current structure of the prosecution team and gave Willis an ultimatum. Either she and her office leave the case or Wade. In a letter, Wade writes today he's resigning to move this case forward as quickly as possible. For Willis, today's ruling is a legal victory, but a professional blow following this stunning 2-hour testimony.
It is a lie. It is a lie.
Judge Scott McAfee scolding what he called her unprofessional manner on the stand. And while not dismissing the case outright, as the defense had asked, McAfee takes Willis to task over, quote, this tremendous lapse in judgment. Tonight, Trump's attorney, Steve Sadow, says he will use all legal options available as we continue to fight to end this case. Also tonight, Trump's former vice.
So let's stop right there for a second, because yes, we already know Mike Pence, America's creepiest Christian, is not going to endorse Trump. That's really old news. What's crazy about this is that for all those that don't remember, because it was on television, that Fulton County DA Fani Willis basically from the witness stand, for lack of better words, whooped the prosecutor's ass when she was testifying, which is the only reason why the prosecution only asked for her to testify one time. After that, they had nothing. Keep in mind, Fani Willis and the prosecutor Nathan Wade did have a relationship. Yes, she did pay him out of his own pocket. Yes. Does this seem a conflict of interest, or was Nathan Wade being paid more for services at the behest of the state? Here's the problem, and I say this wholeheartedly. The prosecution couldn't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt whether Nathan Wade was actually getting paid at the behest of the state more for his services, nor could they also prove that Fani Willis did anything outside of the realm of her office as a district attorney that may have tainted the case. As far as I'm concerned, the case should have been dismissed. But the judge, which again, I'm going to be honest with you, judge seemed like kind of a dick. He sat there and said, well, this was a tremendous lapse in judgment. Even though I can't prove it, even though the prosecution failed to prove their case, even though you can still remain on the case, but I guess I have to be like the adult between two children and say that you guys need to come to a compromise. Whereas either both of you resign or your prosecutor / lover resigns. And I'm sorry, that's kind of bullshit, because the whole case, and again, I'm going to point this out, the whole entire case about Fani Willis was that the fact of the matter is that Trump is getting nailed by people of color, but they're doing it within the realms of the law. Letitia James, nobody's going after Letitia James. No one is saying that she wasn't above board when she nailed Trump for falsifying his property holdings, things of that nature, and now it's holding a $464 million bond over his head while she's awaiting to seize his assets. Nobody's going after her. Nobody is talking about the FBI, who is still investigating Trump, who is holding on to documents and may have compromised national security by letting folks without clearance see those things. Nobody's talking about them. No, but we're going to talk about Fani Willis. Why? Because it took someone to be a whistleblower to sit there and say, hey, the DA and the special prosecutor may have something going on. Really? Does that taint the evidence toward Trump? Well, no. Was the evidence gathered in a manner that was above board and above reproach? Well, yes. So what's the problem? Well, they had an improper relationship, and he might be getting paid on the table. The prosecution failed to actually prove that. But the judge, again, had to do this splitting the baby thing. It's like, well, both of you can't be on this case. It's either both of you or one of you. And of course, Mr. Wade did resign from the case, which again, I don't understand, because if the evidence against Trump is valid and not tainted, then what is the problem? That's all I'm going to say. What is the problem? Outside the fact that this may be another case where Trump may get nailed for election interference. That is a federal crime. And if he's convicted of that, well, then he can't run for president. But let's be honest, with the Supreme Court conservative leading and the fact that they went ahead and reversed certain states that removed him from ballots, I'm just saying, as I said before, guys, the GOP is doing everything they can to hold power, even if it is through Trump. But I digress. But moving right along, I did want to cover the story as well, guys, because DEI, diversity and inclusion programs, I cannot stress, ever since 4 Asian students decided to sue because they decided to sue Harvard and claim discrimination, to the point where the Supreme Court dismantled affirmative action for college entrances. They didn't dismantle the whole thing, just for college entrance for that. For 4 Asian students that swore up and down that the Ivy League school was basically being discriminatory against them. Whereas people of color have always said, first time. Anyway, that actual domino, which a lot of people don't understand, that little caveat that was removed set up companies to look at their diversity exclusivity roles. I'm talking about folks that were brought in to show that companies aren't racist or discriminatory or anything of that nature. And if they did, they would get sued for it, and of course would lose in court. The fact that that piece of the law was struck down, companies have sat there and said, oh, we don't need these diversity roles anymore. Matter of fact, there was actually 3 companies that removed their diversity roles from their payrolls almost immediately. But why are we talking about that, Will? Well, we're talking about that because Alabama will do the same thing, except they, thanks to Governor Kay Ivey, has now signed into law that prohibits diversity, equity, and inclusion at public schools and universities, which basically means any DEI programs, roles, or things of that nature are no longer allowed at public schools and universities, which means the funding and things of that nature are going somewhere else. And that is crazy because we need to have those programs. The same reason why we have affirmative action. We cannot depend on companies to rightfully hire people without making sure there's a rule in place. That's the reason why affirmative action was in the first place. Because again, if you were not of the favorite, which I mean, if you're not a straight white male, it was hard for you to get a job. If you were a woman, it is twice as hard for you to get a job. If you're a person of color, well, I can keep going down the line. If you're not anything but white and a male, it was harder for you to get a job. Affirmative action made to the point to where you had to hire diversity roles. Because again, you're forcing companies to do something that should have been freaking obvious from Jump Street. That also being said, you also had roles and programs to show that to include cultural sensitivity, to include other cultures into society. You had to the point to where we had to show that, yes, we are a melting pot of different cultures and ethnic groups, things of that nature. But when you have what Alabama does, what Alabama has already done, and that's a scary start. I know Alabama is a southern state. Don't get me wrong. I am a Roll Tide fan. But at the same time, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Mississippi, they all seem to follow this. Even Kentucky themselves have now voted to defund diversity, exclusivity offices, DEI offices at public universities, which now, because it's going back to the state, was passed by the House. But Kentucky is trying to do the same thing Alabama's doing, except they're removing offices at public universities. And again, this is an attack on diversity. And it shouldn't be. We should be actually expanding on DEI roles. We should be actually expanding on the fact that that these types of things should really be out there for those types of roles. Even more so, not just attacking diversity, they're attacking education too, because currently what's happening in New York City in the school investigation, you have books that were tossed in the trash. Not just any books. Books that were written by authors of the LGBTQ plus community as well as people of color. Interesting how those are the only books that are thrown out.
Certain books should be kept in, but certain books I've heard are a little bit controversial. I don't know which ones in particular, but maybe those should be removed.
And that may have happened with some books at PS 55 on Staten Island. They'd been left out with the trash with some notes attached. The Black Panther book, for example, has a note on it saying it wasn't approved. The book about an immigrant on the border was summarized as "Our country has no room and it's not fair." And the note on the roller derby book is about a dad discussing being transgender and teenage girls having a crush on another girl. Mike is a PS 55 parent and questions whether certain subjects should be taught at the elementary school level in the first place.
Number one should be the parents to be worried about what they learn and what's being taught to them. 100%.
And while Ellen says she doesn't know anything about books being thrown out here, she would love the immigrant story to be told because it resonates for her son.
I want something like help my son. When he asked me why you speak Spanish, I want something he learned, about the things. So yeah, for me, it's good keeping there.
Gothamist broke the story thanks to a tip from a woman who essentially rescued boxes of books back in November. In a statement, the Department of Education says it is investigating and that our public schools do not shy away from books that teach students about the diverse people and communities. Natasha Capers heads up the Coalition for Educational Justice, and while she's appalled the books were thrown out, she says she hopes it creates more dialogue about diverse stories and voices.
I don't think that we need to like be condemning the school, condemning educators. We are all in this learning process, but I do hope that they get some additional resources to have these conversations about why did we throw out these books? Why did we not think that they were acceptable to children?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because again, here's the thing. As a parent myself, yes, you do worry about what your child is learning in school. However, and I stress this very heavily when I say however, to all parents who believe that your child should not be reading certain books, I would like to think that unless you're an educator, unless you've created a curriculum, unless you have a master's in child care development, unless you've ran a school, unless you've been a principal, unless you've been a teacher, unless you've been in such an area to where you can actually say that your experiences that these books and literature did actually help or harm students. If you have none of those qualifications whatsoever, please have a seat and shut up. Because there are going to be certain things that students are going to have to learn. Like, apparently, To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird is a book that everybody should be reading. The book's about racism. Yes. Yes, it is. The Flowers in the Attic. Another book. Of Mice and Men. Another book. The Grapes of Wrath. Fahrenheit 451. I can keep going down the list. The Diary of Anne Frank. Again, I can keep going about books that kids should be reading because we have to talk about it. It's amazing where they always say, well, parents should have complete control of what their kids learn. Okay, here's my thing. Yes, you should have complete control of what your kids should learn. That being said, homeschool is available, but you don't get the ability to go into a school library or a state library and throw out books because it's almost as if you don't want the kids to learn beyond your rigid bubble, if you will. Because for me, I want my kids to read authors from different ethnic groups. I want my kids to read authors from LGBTQ plus groups. I want my kids to read authors who are people of color, especially those that look like them. Representation matters. But it is amazing to me that when you have parents who are saying, well, I think I should have a say in what my kid learns. Are you going to develop the curriculum? Some of y'all don't even help with homework. Some of y'all don't even pay attention to what a kid does outside of report cards. But now all of a sudden you're worried because you swear up and down your kid in third grade is reading 50 Shades of Grey. Really? You're worried that, Twilight is a thing? Harry Potter? Oh, well, you're not going to teach my kid witchcraft. It's fiction. I assume the same people that are talking about the fact of we should be allowed to, we should have the ultimate say where our kids learn are probably the same people that got mad when they made The Little Mermaid black. Which amazes to me that, this could be the same group. But you know what I always found so funny? That the same parents who will sit there and say, we should have a say over what our kids learn, are probably the same parents who are over these next kids in the next story. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a trigger warning. It's very detailed.
Middle school students have been charged in a racial online bullying incident in Massachusetts. The students from Southwick Regional School allegedly held, get this, an online mock slave auction where white students could bid on their black classmates. According to the DA, the students participated in hateful, racist conduct on social media platform Snapchat. Several of those students were suspended, including 2 for 25 days, 1 for 45 days, while 6 of the students were charged with threats to commit a crime. Now, CNN reached out to the Southwick Regional School and Southwick Toland Granville School District for statements, but we have not heard back yet. But joining me now is the mother of one of the victims, Allison Lopez. I just cannot believe that your daughter has had to experience this. I mean, it's horrifying. It's shocking for many reasons. Can you explain, Allison, exactly what she has gone through now?
She has gone through a different level of trauma, right? When this incident first occurred, I watched her immediately go into a trauma response. And today she still has that same state of mind. It's hard for her every day. Some days could be a little bit better, depending on if she has a friend in her class to really associate herself with. But for the most part, it's a hard thing for her. She's still struggling.
That's heartbreaking to think of, what that experience is like, to know that she's got to see if she's got a safe space per classroom to know how her day is going to go. How did she even learn? How did you learn about this auction?
I received a phone call from the school a couple hours after she entered the school. She woke up the morning of February 9th, the day after the chat happened, and she woke up really hysterical, crying, in this trauma-like behavior, and I couldn't understand what was going on. At that point, she did not have the full in-depth of what happened until she got to school, when one of her friends told her what they heard about it. And at that point, she quickly went to the assistant principal office and shared what she was told. And that's when they started looking into the matter. And I got a phone call telling me that it was an incident.
Crazy, isn't it? It's the same parents, mind you, who will sit there and say, we shall have a say. I guarantee it. I'm not saying there's a relation, but I can't help but wonder. The same parents who will sit there and say, we shall have a say in what our kids learn. Yet 6 middle school students have decided they're going to do a slave auction on Snapchat over their black classmates. And yet it always comes back to the parents. Always. Because where else would they have learned this? Like I said, ignorance isn't hereditary, it's learned. So they've learned it from somewhere. And even more so, what other excuse? Because you can't sit there and say, oh, they're just kids. No. Because where would middle school students get the idea of holding a slave auction and think it's fine? See, that's the part right there that has always bothered me, that they think it's okay to do things that should come with harsher penalties, that should come with a lesson. And that right there is a lesson that should have been learned. But it is an ongoing story. Yes, the kids can get suspended, but again, what's going to happen more with the parents? Because I think a lot more needs to be done. Not just punishment, but education. I think those kids need to have an education, one that they will never forget. But we'll follow that story as it comes along. The other story that we got, guys, is the Goon Squad. The Goon Squad themselves, if you don't remember them, were a police unit that decided to, in Mississippi, detain 2 black men, detain them, beat them, even do sexual acts to them. They were just sentenced as of yesterday. Well, at least 2 of them.
That chilling case that made national headlines, a horrific racial attack in Mississippi. Tonight, 2 former deputies sentenced, part of a group of white officers accused of torturing 2 black men, shooting one of them and beating them. Tonight, one of those officers getting 20 years in prison. Today, the judge calling the crimes, quote, egregious and despicable. Here's ABC's Faith Abube.
Tonight, 2 former Mississippi Sheriff's deputies sentenced for their role in the brutal and racially motivated torture of 2 black men. Deputy Hunter Elward getting 20 years. Lieutenant Jeffrey Middleton sentenced to 17.5 years. They are 2 of 6 officers who have pleaded guilty to federal felony charges. According to court documents, the officers part of a group nicknamed the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force and not report it.
This Goon Squad has been operating without supervision.
In January of last year, the Goon Squad bursting into this home without a warrant after a white neighbor reported several black males for suspicious behavior. Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker placed under arrest in their own home without any evidence of a crime. Prosecutors say the officers then repeatedly tased the 2 men, calling them racial slurs, beating them, and even sexually assaulting them over the course of 90 minutes. Deputy Elward shooting Jenkins in the mouth, execution style, nearly killing him. And as he lay there bleeding, investigators say the 6 officers conspired to cover up their actions, even planting drugs and a gun.
Can you imagine the abject terror those 2 victims must have felt?
Today, Elward apologizing to the victims.
I feel like you get exactly what you did.
Eddie Parker saying he still suffers.
What's done already, man, can't be erased, man, can't be taken back. I relive this every day.
And David, the rest of the officers will be sentenced tomorrow and on Thursday. All 6 are facing additional sentencing on state charges at a later date.
And the thing about it is, with 20 years being given a couple of them, I'm not gonna lie, it's not enough. If you've been watching this podcast, guys, you know that my feeling on law enforcement, the fact that law enforcement is protected almost as high as guns in this country, and the fact that these deputies have done deplorable acts, have literally false arrested 2 men, deplorable acts, tased them, even attempted to kill one. That's the part that I'm not understanding. You're telling me that an officer could detain a black man, could beat him, tase him, Lord knows whatever else had happened in that house between him and them. And then the officer decides to take a gun, put it in the guy's mouth, and shoot. And he only gets 20 years? Let me understand this correctly. The man literally takes a gun, puts it in the guy's mouth, pulls the trigger, and he only gets 20 years. Well, there's other charges coming. Okay, yeah, cool. But you're telling me for two of the deputies of the Goon Squad that for what they did, they get 20 years. You've affected 2 black men's lives to where they have to live with the trauma of what you've done to them. And the most that happens to you outside of no longer being a law enforcement agent is that you get 20 years. I'm going to be honest with you. I got to agree with him when he said it wasn't enough. It's not enough. And it makes you wonder, will it be enough? Because again, those men didn't need to go through what happened to them. The actions of 6 officers who decided they were above the law, even more so try to cover up their actions. How are they not life in prison? That's the thing I'm not understanding. How is it that they only get 20 years and not life in prison? I mean, death penalty. Okay, fine. Throw that out. Although to me, I'm going to be honest with you, once he decided to shoot a man in his mouth, I think his life is forfeit. That's just me. But okay, no death penalty. Why not life in prison? Because they've effectively, irrecoverably ruined 2 black men's lives. These 6 officers could somehow still see jails, could still somehow see the outside of a jail time in 20 to 40 years, given the additional charges that are guaranteed, given the additional sentencing that may happen. That's the problem. If they got life in prison, okay, cool. Their life is over. Their life should be forfeit because they've abused the badge and the abilities that they've been given and almost into 2 men's lives because they thought they could get away with it. I'm sorry, 20 years ain't enough. It isn't. But speaking of things that are not enough, the story of CJ Rice. If you don't know this, guys, this is why I keep bringing up these stories, that whenever it comes to law enforcement, prosecution, courts, and things of that nature, there are so many people that we're finding out that were literally arrested and jailed, put behind bars for multiple years for crimes they didn't commit. And then we find out years later only for them to be exonerated. And you know what? As many times these stories keep coming out, we're going to keep sharing them.
And I'm Jake Tapper in Philadelphia, and I'm going to start with some good news for once. I'm in Philly because there are major developments here in a legal case that we've been following for years here on The Lead involving CJ Rice, who is now a free man. As of this morning, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania officially considers CJ Rice to be legally innocent of the crimes he was convicted of in 2013. District Attorney Larry Krasner dropped all charges and exonerated him today. Now, you might remember me talking about this case on CNN and in an Atlantic magazine cover story in October 2022. CJ Rice was sentenced to 30 to 60 years in prison. 30 to 60 years for a 2011 shooting in which no one was seriously injured. I know about the case because my dad, Dr. Theodore Tapper, was CJ Rice's pediatrician at the time and testified at court that it was medically impossible for CJ Rice to have carried out this crime, shooting the victims and running away, because CJ Rice at that time was recovering from surgery since he had been shot 3 weeks before and his pelvis had been shattered. He could barely walk at the time, much less run. Now, it became clear from investigating this case for The Atlantic and CNN that C.J. Rice had an incompetent defense attorney, that court-appointed counsel, Sanjay Weaver, who failed to bring up his medical records or pull his cell phone data that would have confirmed his alibi, who didn't challenge the complete concoction of conjecture that was the supposed motive for the shooting, and on and on and on, bad decision after bad decision. Now, after following C.J. Rice's case and fighting for C.J. Rice's conviction to be overturned for years, with my father leading the way and an incredible legal team challenging the conviction, I am happy to report that C.J. was finally released from prison in December.
Hey, man. What's up, Jake? How about it? What's going on? How about it?
Oh, it's good to see you. Oh, it's good to see you, man.
Today's ruling brings even more good news for CJ, because not only is he out of prison, Judge James Eisenhower granted him a habeas petition which overturns his conviction, drops all charges against CJ Rice, forever clearing his name. His attorneys will now file to have that criminal record expunged. If you want to help CJ Rice as he begins to rebuild his life, you can check out the GoFundMe set up by dream.org. All of the money goes right to CJ Rice so he can go to school and buy groceries and start to rebuild his life. Here is a look now at CJ Rice's story and how we got here. Finally, CJ Rice is free and exonerated. And in the eyes of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, innocent of the crime for which he served more than 12 years in prison. It has been a journey. For years, my dad, pediatrician Dr. Theodore Tapper, has been telling me about CJ Rice, his former patient, doing 30 to 60 years in prison for a crime my father insists Rice could physically not have committed.
It was impossible.
In 2020, I took a look into the case and wrote this 2022 cover story for The Atlantic magazine, arguing that CJ Rice had had inadequate counsel, an attorney who acted so incompetently, CJ did not get the fair trial guaranteed him under the U.S. Constitution. The piece was called "This Is Not Justice: A Philadelphia Teenager and the Empty Promise of the Sixth Amendment." And today, the court granted the motion offered by Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, agreeing with CJ Rice's attorneys, Carl Schwartz and Amelia Maxfield, that Rice was denied his Sixth Amendment rights to effective counsel.
It would be a violation of my oath to retry a case when we know that if you put all of the reliable evidence forward, it doesn't establish proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Krasner's office has acknowledged that the case handled by prior prosecutors was weak from the start, that there wasn't much evidence at all. No DNA, no weapon, no footage, no solid, unimpeachable witness tying Rice to the September 2011 nighttime shooting and wounding of 4 people.
This is the position where one of the shooters was, the one that was ID'd as CJ Rice, the night of September 25th, 2011. The eyewitness testified that he was 20 feet away. 20 feet away, however, would actually have put him like here. This is 20 feet away. Where I was before, all the way over there, that's more like 50 feet away.
Witnesses said they saw the gunman running, but my dad had examined the 17-year-old CJ Rice just 5 days earlier, and he insisted CJ was in no condition to run.
He had staples in his abdomen over approximately an 8 or 9 inch surgical incision from his breastbone straight down as far as you could go.
That's because 3 weeks earlier, CJ Rice had been shot 3 times in a case CJ says was mistaken identity.
There was no way this young man, 5 days after I saw him, was running anywhere, let alone walking fast.
The one eyewitness who fingered CJ had known him for years. She initially and repeatedly told police she could not identify the gunman, as one of Rice's attorneys, Jason Kadish, told me.
I think it was approximately 20 hours where she had spoken to at least
I think it was 3 different officers, and it never said, this is somebody that's in my neighborhood.
But overnight, police claimed a confidential informant told them that Rice may have been involved. So a detective then showed this photo array to the eyewitness, and she then fingered Rice. When Rice was named as a suspect, his mother, Crystal Cooper, met him at the police station so that he could turn himself in.
And the detective took his arm to help him walk up the stairs.
C.J. Rice's family could not afford legal counsel, so court-appointed private attorney Sanjay Weaver took his case. And Weaver, who died in 2019, did not provide C.J. with an adequate defense. A source in the DA's office tells me that the witness's testimony would not stand up to any competent defense attorney.
She stated that Mr. Rice had braids hanging down around his face with a hoodie tied up around it. When we looked at the arrest photo for Mr. Rice, he actually had cornrows. So there was no way that he would have been able to have braids hanging down the side of his face.
Though, perhaps tellingly, it had been in long braids in the photo from the police lineup that the witness was shown from a previous drug charge. Another part of the DA's review that helped them arrive at this decision, CJ had told Weaver over and over to get the location data for his cell phone. It would prove that he was at the time in West Philadelphia, not the South Philadelphia site of the shooting. But Sanjay Weaver never got that data, nor did the police.
After the trial, then CJ started telling me, oh, she should have did this. I told her to do this. She didn't listen to me.
The DA's office reviewed old recorded courthouse phone conversations and heard CJ Rice begging his mom to push Sanjay Weaver, his attorney, to get those phone records to prove his alibi.
If this case had occurred yesterday, it is very likely that it wouldn't be so murky, that we would have phone records that would geolocate to exactly where Mr. Rice was, or pretty close to exactly where he was.
There were any number of hideous omissions in Sanjay Weaver's incompetent defense of CJ Rice. Attorney Carl Schwartz zeroed in on Weaver allowing into evidence the concocted motive that this was a retaliatory shooting for when CJ Rice was shot, though neither the DA nor the Philly police had any evidence connecting the two shootings. The case has consumed my father's life for the better part of the last decade, and though both he and CJ Rice are celebrating today, they believe that the prisons are packed with others just like him.
There are probably 10 or 20 or 40,000 people who are serving time behind bars who are not guilty of the crime for which they are serving time.
I sat down with CJ one-on-one a few days ago for the first time since he'd been released. We talked about what it felt like to finally be free and the letters he exchanged with my dad while he was behind bars.
So it's crazy, isn't it? That imagine a crime that you didn't commit. You lost 12 years of your life only because the prosecution that you had at the time didn't do their job. And again, CJ Rice is one of many stories out there, guys, that it makes me wonder about the legal system. It makes me wonder when you have public defenders that are overstacked with cases and can't give everybody additional attention. You have prosecutors that are too willing to go for conviction rates, and you have judges that won't give it a second thought with a jury. And how many times have we sat there and seen guys like CJ Rice, who, again, if you've been watching this podcast, we've covered quite a few stories to where they're basically innocent, even though the evidence was never gathered properly. So I hope in CJ Rice's case that there's going to be some comeuppance. And again, for 12 years of your life, that's 12 years of your life, 12 productive years of your life that you don't get back. So I hope he does get compensated for that by the state. But we will definitely check in on that because, again, this goes to show you that projects like the Innocent Project out there are doing great work trying to find these cases that fall through the cracks. But speaking of falling through the cracks, guys, I know we talked about legal immigrants earlier this in the podcast, and that, you know, people like DeSantis and Greg Abbott are doing their best when it comes to illegal immigrants, busing them to different cities, even to the point to where Chicago has to make some interesting choices.
Tonight, Chicago pushing out migrants, evicting them from city-run shelters. The controversial policy enforcing a 60-day limit, an effort to manage their growing numbers, rolling out after months of delays. But how they're being pushed out is leaving many confused and frustrated. One migrant telling NBC News he was told about his eviction the day before, saying administrators first gave him a deadline of 2 p.m. Monday, but shortly after changed it to 12:30 p.m. Outside the shelter on Sunday, migrants waited, unsure of what's next for them.
It's a lot of not good answers, and people out there being left in the street.
Some local officials and advocates saying it's unthinkable to push these people out in the cold, and that many do not have work authorization yet because of a 150-day waiting period after applying for asylum.
We think that if folks aren't able to get work authorization, they don't have rental assistance, they're most likely ending up homeless.
The mayor defending the policy in a statement, saying the city has limited resources to meet the scale of arrivals and is constantly evaluating options.
They can return to the landing zone and request another shelter placement. If there's a placement available, they'll be able to do that. Some may choose to move on.
According to the city, more than 37,000 migrants have been bused to Chicago since 2022, when Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, began sending them. As of last week, the city says it's successfully relocated nearly 20,000 people and is in the process of relocating about 4,000 more. That still leaves thousands of migrants like Lisbeth Velasquez in the city shelter system. She says she fled Venezuela due to political persecution 7 months ago.
Te piden el contrato de trabajo, te piden el estado de cuenta, te piden unos requisitos que, o sea, actualmente yo no cuento con ninguno.
When we spoke to Velasquez back in February, she was set to be evicted by April 1st.
Es preocupante porque eso van a inundar los distritos policiales, las calles. Creo que no es la solución.
She now tells us her deadline has been moved to May 1st. The city says it's granting extensions on an individual basis, including in cases where migrants are enrolled in public benefit programs, need medical care, or have children. In the meantime, migrants like Velasquez are living with uncertainty.
Estoy trabajando, no tengo recursos económicos para pagar una vivienda.
And Valerie Castro joins us now. Valerie, there are also reports of a measles outbreak at a migrant shelter in Chicago. What can you tell us?
Well, it certainly complicates things, right? The city says at least 10 cases of the measles have been traced to one shelter in the city. So the mayor says his goal now is to ensure that migrants can get vaccinated when they get there before they enter the shelter system, especially if they plan on staying long term.
So imagine, if you will, that, of course, again, as I explained earlier, that Greg Abbott and those of that nature are out here basically making sure that, hey, we don't want you in Florida. We don't want you in Texas. We're going to send you to other sanctuary cities and states, Chicago being one of them. And here's my thing. If those governors are using federal funding dollars to send immigrants to these cities and states that are overloading their services, overloading their homeless programs, things of that nature, here's what I would do if I was Chicago. If you know where they're coming from, build them. I would be sending an invoice to the state of Texas and saying, okay, here's the cost for all the housing for all the immigrants you bust to us. Because if they're going to do that, make them pay the bill. But at the same time, it amazed me so to go right back to this whole entire thing that the immigration system in America has always been broken. Has been tried to be fixed? Yeah, a couple of times. We had DACA, we had the DREAM Act, we had to where there was a path to citizenship that may or may have not involved military service. And let's be honest, the GOP have shot this down. The GOP believe in doing razor wire moats, man-eating crocodiles, if you will, to keep people from crossing into the U.S., which, again, as vast as our country is, it's not like we have a vacancy problem. It's the fact that, well, Republicans love to complain about the GOP system being broken, but they have no answers. Their answer is a wall. And I'm sorry, as much as immigrants are crossing the border, they're actually getting over here by planes, trains, and automobiles now. But the way that we actually solve the immigration problem is to fix the system. Instead of sending armored convoys, National Guard to the border, how about we send immigration judges, workers, personnel? How about we actually try to fix the immigration system that we currently have and actually try to work with these countries that are that these people are leaving, these people are escaping from, and actually try to establish cities, try to establish settlements, try to establish the things that actually help these people versus putting them in a shelter and then realizing that when your time is up, we have to kick you out. I know for a lot of people are going to be like, well, we have our own issues here. Why are we helping immigrants? Why are we doing all this? That's what they always say on Fox News. They say it all the time. Why give immigrants a place to stay? Why give them cars? Why give them money? Here's the thing that you should be asking. Who is the one approving all of this? Because again, it always comes back to who is approving. And I always say, when it comes to your vote, when it comes to who you are putting to speak for you, to be your advocate in a office, to where either it's your city, whether it's your state, whether it's the House, whether it's Senate, whether it's the presidency, whether it's the judicial board, whether it's the Supreme Court, it's who you're sending there that you need to know. Because the simple fact of the matter is, we've seen what happens when the immigration system is broken. We've seen what happens when the veteran affairs system is broken. But are you sending the people there that will actually fix it, or complain about it being broke and doing nothing about it? That's all I'm saying. But we're going to move on to our feel-good segment, guys, because usually on How the Frack We Got Here, we usually cover a lot of things that are doom and gloom. Sometimes make use of faith and humanity, but hey, it's Wednesday, it's hump day. We will leave you guys out some good vibrations, and hopefully the next area will do that, because, again, I am all for teaching kids new things. Now, granted, I have probably told a lot about myself on here. I am not a very good flyer. I am not a fan of heights. I do know that when it comes to flying, I have no choice but to do it, just because you get to some places a lot faster than you will do driving. That being said, what happens when you open up the idea of flight to children? Well, you create new possibilities.
Lincoln County Drive to Bago 4, Quebec is currently 5 miles to the northwest. We enter midfield, downwind, runway 23, Lincoln County traffic.
You want to be a pilot now? I thought you wanted to be a teacher. No. All right.
Fly for the Culture is a nonprofit organization, and what we do is promote diversity and inclusion within the aviation industry. The way that we do that is reaching young people where they are through our social media networks on Instagram, Facebook, and even TikTok. Once we reach these young kids, we introduce them to a flight, what's called an introductory flight, and take them up for free through the donations that we receive through the organizations. It's a quick 10 to 15 minute flight around the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and once we're done taking a flight, we stay connected through social media and help mentor them to pursue a career in becoming a pilot. I was actually a pilot in the Navy. And while serving as a pilot in the Navy, I noticed that I was one of the 2 African Americans in the entire squadron. So I wanted to make a change, so I created this organization. I wanted to just showcase other African Americans that are pilots. So sometimes I believe with young people, you gotta see it to believe it, and being able to see someone that looks like them gives them the motivation to maybe pursue a career in aviation.
So what it comes down to, guys, is that representation matters. Again, I hope this does lead to more pilots, more aviation mechanics, because we need them. And if you can see yourself in that position, then that just lets you know it is definitely needed for the culture. But that's going to do it for this podcast, guys. I do want to thank you all who are watched as this went live or shared it. If you shared it, I hope you did share it. If you did, I appreciate that so much. Before we do get out of here, guys, some shameless plugging as usual. Shout out to my boy Vaughn at Big VZA Dot. You can definitely check out his music page on YouTube, but definitely check him out for beats, things of that nature that can be found on all social media under Big VZA Dot. Also, definitely check out BlurStation.com, guys. I have sat there and said about this site for a long time that this is a site that should have been what Tubi is now, which is basically a site for blurs, for nerds, for people of color, for movies, for anime, for television shows. For people of color, this is definitely it. And I cannot stress to you enough that I am all about the mission about Blur Station. But If you want to check us out, definitely go to blurredstation.com. If you want to join us, go ahead hit the join now button. Once you do, go to the Blurred's Eye View Affinity membership, guys. And as you can see there at the price of $10.99, that is the Affinity membership. And from there, you can select anybody here, including myself at Black Spartan. We would certainly appreciate that. And at $10.99 a month, guys. Let me be completely honest about that. $10.99 a month is the charge for Blurred Station. Again, with a lot of content, and it's getting added by the day. Also, at the same time, the one thing I'll say about Blurred Station, if you are a content provider, you can definitely also look at Blurred Station. We ask that you do join first. Once you do join Blurred Station, you can definitely make your pitch to the to Blurred Station, and from there, hopefully you'll be on. And the beauty about Blurred Station, guys, you keep your ownership of your content. The only thing they ask for is in the distribution. And again, if you haven't noticed with Tubi got really big because of because let's be honest, of Black content creators. At the same time, Tubi is owned by the same guy that does Fox. That's all I'm saying. Rupert Murdoch wins again. So the thing about it is we want to own ourselves. We want to own what we create, and we want to be able to get our own dollars from it. Blurred Station is it. Definitely check out blurredstation.com, guys. You will not be disappointed. As for myself, you can usually find me, Black_Spartan615 on the socials. As I do reviews on everything, and including have my own also my own shows. The link at the bottom, guys, will just make that a little bit bigger for you guys to see. If you'll copy and paste that link into your browser, it'll take you to my link tree. There's YouTube and Facebook groups for all my podcasts. How the Frack We Got Here, Get Bit, and of course, Self-Defense Podcast. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications, because again, much like PBS, this does not run without you. So don't just like, although I appreciate the fact that people like, I appreciate the fact that people know about it. Again, like, share, follow, tell people about it. The mission of this show is to keep people informed, but also to encourage you to be informed. So as long as that's being done, then my job is done, and I'm very happy about it. But again, guys, the mission has always been to inform, to enrich, to encourage, because there is way too much stuff going on in the world right now to not only not be aware, but to be active. I can only say that much because even my progressive backward state of Tennessee, we always be active. No different than the state that you're living in. So please, above all else, as we are in this election season, get to know the candidates that you're voting for. Get to know their issues. Press them. At the same time, if you don't like the choices, put forward people who you know will do better. Or at the same time, you yourself can run. There's plenty of sites out there that will show you actually how to run for office in your city, in your state, if you choose to. But at the same time, I hope to inform and to act, and hopefully you guys can get to do that. The last thing I'll say about the Frack We Got Here, guys, is all about staying informed. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are simply giving you all the information, allow you to make up your own mind for it. But we do provide a logical point of view that goes along with it. We do better in society once we're informed. We're progressive. We move forward. We try to right the wrongs of our past by making decisions now that we should have done back then. Like electing our first Black woman to the Supreme Court, electing our first Black woman to the Federal Board of Governors, electing our first Black woman to be a national cybersecurity director. All great things. When we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. That's what we keep asking ourselves. Why does everything go up at our paycheck? Why are we electing different politicians? Still the same old game in Congress. And most importantly, how the Frack We Got Here. Again, guys, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll all get through this. Peace.